Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unfolding the Soul. I'm here with Father Eric. He's been the Catholic representation on this little corner of the internet. And we found out that submission has been a big part of his life. And so we're going to talk about that. And we're going to start off with having a definition of submission. So, like, how would you define that?
I guess what I'm thinking about is just placing your own desires and plans underneath some other purpose, maybe another person's purpose, or maybe another organization's purpose, and placing yourself underneath that and allowing the purpose that you've submitted yourself to become more important than let's say exactly what I want to do according to my own desires.
Mm-hmm. And is that a definition that somebody told you, or is this something that revealed itself through participation?
That is, I guess it just revealed itself through participation. I didn't look at a dictionary, and it's not, I don't know, I guess it's just a word that nobody ever bothered to define for me. So,
Yeah, like I think a lot of people have trouble understanding with the submission, right? Like there's this element of being beneath, but
mhm.
then like that brings conflict, right? Because now you're lesser, right? And people don't like that. And so I hope we can kind of set that straight, like how that works and how there's a beneficial aspect to the submission as well.
Mhm.
Um, so what does it mean to you, submission? Like,
Well, um, I could go back to a very early memory that I have. I was maybe 3 or 4 years old at this point, and I was in church with my family on a Sunday morning. Now, if you've never been to a Catholic church, you'll find that you spend a lot of time kneeling during the Catholic Mass. Um, and when I was real little, the way I would kneel is I would kind of have my butt sticking out so that it would hit the back of the pew. And then I'd just be kind of like hunched forward, a very comfortable position. And I think my dad let me get away from it when I was really little. But then I got to a certain point and he started like making it clear to me that he didn't want me to do that anymore. And I pushed back a couple of times and he continued to like, no, to give me that little look, and then I'd do it for again, and then I'd try it again, and I'd look again. I went back up, and until I got to the point where I decided I wasn't just going to bother with it anymore, and I was just going to kneel up straight and try and be good. So I think that was actually a certain amount of submission right there, giving up my own desire for comfort, and not really. I think what it was that I didn't understand why this was important.
mm-hmm,
And in the middle of the church service, my dad wasn't going to give an explanation as to why bodily posture actually affects spiritual movements, because a 4-year-old's not going to be able to handle that. So he just said, this is the way we do things. And now that I'm a little older and now that I understand things, it's like, yeah, you want the kids being upright and reverent while they're in church, because that's how they learn that this is important. Even if they're not able to fully understand that.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it
so I
sounds like
guess
you're talking about surrender a little bit there, right? Because you didn't fully understand what you were participating in at that point in time.
mhm, mhm.
And
And a 4-year-old's not going to be able to handle very much in terms of understanding of what's going on. So you have to spend a lot of time leading them, I think. But just because I'm curious, do you see a difference between surrender and submission, or
well, yeah, like so the surrendering is in relationship to the authority, right?
okay?
So in a sense, it's sort of like I'm my own authority, I'm my own authority, I'm my own
Mhm,
authority. And you're like, well, I guess my dad is going to be the authority right now. It's like,
mhm, mhm,
but but then you. you have to commune in order to submit, right? Like, because the submitting is not only pointing towards your dad, it's pointing towards something higher with your dad, right? And then obviously it's really fuzzy with that, and obviously there's something like you could sit there and be prideful of your participation as a family in the church, right? And then it would be submission. So it's really fuzzy, but I think it's how you internally relate to that, right? That is what, whether it defines surrender or submission. And you need to surrender in order to submit, right? But we had this discussion on the Discord, and we came up with the word yield, because you can also yield, which is like unwillful surrender or whatever.
Right. I'm only doing this because you're pointing a gun at my head.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or look at me strange.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it might have been yielding early on, but sometimes yielding yields to surrender. So
yeah, sometimes it's necessary, especially as a man.
So yeah, I'm just grateful that my dad was persistent, that he didn't give up. And he also, I don't think he was overly harsh in any of this. It was just kind of ordinary sorts of corrections for everything.
But it did stay with you, right? So where did that salience, and you mentioned gratitude, right? Like how did you get that relationship?
Well, maybe we can move on to another incident. All of these are going to be church and God related because I got this thing on. So that's what tends to happen. I want to go fast forward to when I'm not a 4-year-old, but when I'm a 4th grader. Our family had moved to Stavanger, Norway, because my dad was in the Air Force. He had gotten assigned on a NATO station there. And we started attending the one Catholic church in Stavanger, Norway, because there aren't a whole lot of Catholics up there. And my dad noticed that the altar servers were all kind of in disarray. And so he offered to help the new priest there train the altar servers to get them kind of in shape. And since he was bringing 5 altar servers with him, we started serving a lot. And I remember one particular incident. I'd been serving maybe a couple months at this point, but I got lots of reps because it was a small church, and we were there every Sunday, so we got a lot of practice. So I was starting to figure out how it worked, and I was starting to get a little bit good at it. I wasn't just what happens now? But I was like, oh, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. This is all how it's supposed to work out. I noticed another server make a mistake, right? And I was like, oh no, he messed that up. I literally did that kind of gesturing at the altar, And so after mass, I can't remember if it was my dad or Father Radar or both of them, but they said, when somebody makes a mistake up on the altar, we know that happens. It's actually much more important that you just remain reverent yourself rather than expressing your disapproval. And they pointed out that most of the people in the congregation probably didn't notice the mistake, but they would have noticed me behaving in an unbecoming way up on the altar. So I was like, oh, that is a new way of understanding this. And so I was, as far as I could tell, I began to submit this myself to this ideal of reverent worship, right? And that that was much more important than my desire to see everybody do everything correctly, and my desire to just express myself when something went wrong. It's like, nope, you got to just kind of can that and just look holy there. And so that was actually, I think, a really important lesson for me. It was nice that our church had standards. and that it expected me to like kind of step up to these standards instead of just, oh, he was fine, he's just a fourth grader, he can't really understand what's going on. But I also think that that was, this young priest, the associate there, he had just gotten back from seminary in Rome, and I was in his first year in seminary, and I really looked up to him on account of what he was embodying, his kind of reverent presence in the liturgy and all of that. And so part of that was submitting myself to this spirit of the liturgy, of this reverence and that reverent attitude.
Yeah, so like it sounds to me that you're now talking about a conflict between the ego and the needs of the group, right, or the spirit of the group, and the submission is in recognizing how to put yourself back, right, and letting something else manifest,
Mhm.
in contrast to your personal spirit, right, like your personal needs and interests. So yeah, that's real beautiful. So did that, beside that, did that have any changes in the way that you were living your life? Like did that manifest some new insight in the way that you were being?
Oh goodness. Yeah, let's think back to fourth and fifth grade, huh? That's I think that probably was planting a seed that I wasn't going to fully appreciate what that meant for a while. So to think like that changed the way that my week or my month, I don't really. But I think it was kind of the implicit lesson of worshiping God does demand a certain level of excellence,
Mhm.
um, and a certain amount of self-control. What we do here is important, and so we need to behave as if that is important, not how you might on the playground or at home. So it did also give me, I think, a sense of the sacred, that this is holy, that this is set aside, and it literally, it forced me to actually embody that instead of just thinking about it. So I think those are all kind of long-term things that, maybe didn't affect me much immediately, but set myself up on a different pathway.
Yeah, so I want to touch a little bit about the forcing to embody, because the way I envision your trajectories is that you're being cut into shape, right? Like
Mhm,
you're being put in a set of constraints, and
mhm.
you're yielding to the constraints, right? Like, so it's like, and then that allows you to engage differently, right? So it allows you to have a new form of experience. And so what is this thing that's building inside of you, like this new way of participation, this seed, like
Yeah, yeah.
how does it grow within
I
you?
think I started to love going to church at that point. All right. Prior to becoming an altar boy, I really didn't like going to church. And I think there's a certain unavoidable thing where um, it's hard to participate sometimes. It's hard to participate, especially for young children, because there's just all this stuff happening, and it's not play. It's not the play like you're accustomed to. So what that and I think with it, Romano Guardini, early 20th century theologian on liturgy, he described liturgy as serious play, right? So you're acting out all these different sorts of things, and it's very serious, but it still is got this. It frees you, and it draws you out of yourself into communal activity. And so once I started getting a little better trained at altar serving, and started embodying that spirit, I found myself connecting with what we were doing at church in a way that wasn't merely obedience anymore. Wasn't merely yielding to my dad who made us go every Sunday, but it was like, oh, I'm a part of what's going on here. right? This isn't just something that the adults do up front while I have to sit still for some reason.
Mhm. There's a draw in the being a part of, right? So it's like
Mhm.
pulling you out into the participation. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
like
then I was able to see it as good.
yeah, right. So I assume that that happened in the background, right? Like you don't really have a way to understand that or to articulate that. So
Mhm.
so when, yeah, like how does that evolve over time?
Well, so what happened is that we moved again because we were in a military family, and military families move a lot. So we moved to back to the United States, and started going to a different parish. So the young priest who helped my dad train the altar boys, he did actually kind of change the way they were doing it up in Norway. And kind of like tighten things up. It was all a little more ceremonial, a little more straight up, straight up. And I got to really love that. We also used incense every Sunday mass. And it's just like, ooh, that's priest goals right there. When they've got enough servers where and everybody just knows there's going to be incense, and the people who are allergic to it, they sit in the back, and everybody's happy. um, And I started to notice that when we went to a different parish where things were not like that. And I was still a faithful altar server. I was on the schedule. It was a bigger parish, so I wasn't serving quite as often, but I still enjoyed it. But, I had gone from it's called the cassock and surplice. So we would put the black robes underneath and then put kind of a white coat on top of it. It's probably a cassock and surplice. I went from that to just a white owl, but I didn't like that as much. And there weren't as many servers, and the servers didn't have quite as much to do. And the standards, I'd had these standards baked into me in the 2 years that I was in Norway, but they stayed in me, but they weren't like held up to the same way. Um, and I was just like, I miss being at my old church. I liked the way we were doing things here, even though I still had that new attitude towards the mass and the new appreciation for it and finding it important.
So how's that connecting to the service? Like in some sense, it seems like you had this standard, right? And then you got let down continuously, but
Hmm.
you still continued your participation. And
Hmm.
did that
Yeah, and so
affect
I
your
think
spirit?
that's where the transformation came in, is that I had gotten to a place where I appreciated going to mass on Sunday. It's like, this is now important to me. And even if you're dedicated to something, even when a particular instance of it doesn't go all that well, you still think that it was worthwhile that you did it, and you're still going to commit to coming back to it again, right? So even though I wasn't enjoying serving mass as much as I'd had in Norway, I was still enjoying it, and I still found it important enough to not only show up when I was scheduled, but also be one of the ones where if somebody didn't show up, they could call on me. I could do it. If in the middle of the school day they needed a server for a funeral, I went to a Catholic school, so I got to get out of school every once in a while for a funeral, that sort of thing. Um, and remaining pretty loyal to that. So
So you think the submittance allowed you to cultivate a sense of loyalty,
yeah, yeah,
right? And so I think the thing that needs to be highlighted is that this is all having a positive affect, right? Because you can have a
mhm,
sense of duty, which is bound within responsibility and not so much in loyalty, which would be like freely giving. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, like where does that take you?
Well, takes me into high school. Takes me getting kind of near the end of my junior year of high school. And at the end of my junior year of high school, people began asking me a very irritating question. What was I going to do after high school? And it's like, oh, golly, do I have to figure that out? It's just, but I had it in my head that I needed to explore being a priest. Like that was very much on my horizon. I've never had an experience of losing my faith entirely. Which, high school is a time where that starts to happen. Um, in my religion classes at my Catholic high school, it's like that was so stinking easy. Like I could just I had it all down. I never had to study for any of those tests. It's like I knew all this stuff already. It's just listening to the religion teachers and the priests and all that, and just absorbing it and still having a passion for it. I wasn't serving quite as much. I'd actually switched over into music ministry during high school because I also had a love for choir at that point. And there is an unfortunate sense if you don't give the servers enough to do, especially as they get older, they lose interest in it. And so, an ideal altar server program would have it where like the kind of your late middle school, early high school guys are going to be put with a fair amount of responsibility for instructing the younger ones too. And that wasn't there at my parish. So I moved
Yeah,
on to music ministry.
you got to build that responsibility, because I think that's an important aspect, right? Like, because that's in some sense the thing that binds you, but it also allows you to grow into and reestablish your relationship to what you were doing. Because if you're now teaching what you were doing now, that brings a whole new kettle of fish on board. So you didn't get that, and you diverted, but then you had this sense of being a priest, and I kind of want to like connect it to your experience right now. So like, was your anticipation mapping on what you were really going to do? Like, did you have a proper understanding of what that would entail?
Like as a high schooler?
Mm-hmm.
No, but that's okay. Um, so some of it does, right? Like, um, I enjoy preaching as much as I thought I would. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I had enjoyed public speaking in high school. I would put the work in to give a classroom presentation or a speech, and it always went well. And so it's like that part is still love the liturgy, still love incense. My relationship to it is a little different now. It's much more regular. It's like I'm doing it every day. Say a mass every day. And it's now, I get genuinely excited when I've got an opportunity to teach one of the older kids how to do the incense or how to do something a little more complicated. Um, I find that very enjoyable. Oh, there's large aspects of priestly ministry that I just had no awareness of in high school because I just didn't. But
And maybe share some of those with the public. So like, what's
yeah,
behind the closed doors?
yeah, sure. So I spent a fair bit of time preparing people to get married. So they'll end up doing 3 meetings with me, various things to go over, various topics to work with. Um, the experience of the confessional wasn't quite what I was expecting. I had underestimated how boring listening to people's sins is, and in my imagination, it was always, me with the wisdom coming in and fixing people's problems. And you get out into the field, and it's like, oh, it's actually a little more complicated than that, because I did get some wisdom from priests when I would go to confession. And as it turns out, that didn't fix all of my problems. But the probably one of the things that I'm coming to appreciate about Catholic seminary is it's still got like a very much master apprentice sort of that's how it's designed, right? So there is lay faculty at just about any seminary, but the people who are running the show are priests, right? So you're being, it's more education with the training, rather than it just being pure training. And so I now appreciate that a little bit more. It's not just take these classes, learn these procedures, but it's like look up to these men, see how they do, listen to them, and learn from them. Um, and so that started filling in a lot of the gaps that I didn't know in high school about what being a priest was going to be like. I remember hearing like some of these crazy stories of like, I was trying to carry my groceries into into the rectory there, and this woman came up and asked me for confession, and I wasn't going to hear her confession in the rectory, so we did the confession right there in the driveway, and it took half an hour. That kind of, oh, okay, that's the kind of stuff that happens, right? That didn't happen to me. That happened to, I mean, that was a story I kind of remember hearing. Like, yeah, not gonna take this attractive young lady into the rectory by myself. And so even though it's like 40 degrees out, we're gonna do it right here, So some of it's the same, but a lot of it I had to grow into because the church won't ordain anybody under the age of 25 to the priesthood. And that is really a good policy there because I look at myself as 22 after 4 years of seminary and like, yep, that guy wasn't ready. He
What
still
makes
needed
you
to be
say
in.
that?
Well, what makes me say it was I'll tell the whole story. There's this Catholic Extension Society in the United States. They do like scholarships and grants and contributions to fundraising activities. And so they sponsored me to go on this 9-week program in Omaha, Nebraska. It was a spirituality program, right? And so I think they sponsored a fair number of guys to go on it. It's a good program. Still benefit from it today. They like did an interview with me, right? 22-year-old Father Eric,
Is
still
this
had
on
lots of
YouTube?
hair up here, clean shaven, sideburns, all that. You can still find it, I'm sure, in the like a September 2015 edition of the Catholic Extension magazine. And they were asking me why I was excited to be a priest. And if you read between the lines a little bit, because they edited it nicely, but I was basically excited to be a priest so I could tell people how to do things right.
Mm.
Because, that's where I was at. And they kept me in the seminary a little bit longer. So it's like, maybe the love of God and love of neighbor should actually have something to do with this, right? Like maybe it isn't all about you being correct, huh? Yeah. Still have
Mm.
to cure myself of that every once in a while, but I still needed further submission to the ideal of Christ at that point.
Yeah, so you were talking about this idea of educating in the seminary. Do you think your experience with submission helped with the education, like your ability to be educated?
Yeah, I think so. So it's an institution, right? And it's kind of a controlled institution, and it's kind of a tight institution. A seminary is, where you're put under, like they start putting you under the sort of things that you're going to be expected to do as a priest, right? Uh, you're going to be expected to, show up for an early morning mass, right? Because it's on the schedule. You've got the 7 a.m. mass. You got to be there early enough to get everything ready. Got to be early enough to make sure everything goes well. So what do? They give you morning prayer at 7 a.m. So that part was easy for me. I could just get out of bed, get to morning prayer, and I was rarely late. And I didn't really miss it for most of the seminary. So it's like, hey, this guy, he shows up to morning prayer just because we put it on the schedule, right? So that's, it's like it just showed up to morning prayer because it was on the schedule, showed up to evening prayer because it was on the schedule. All righty, he sees what's on the schedule, and he just goes for it because that's what's expected to him. That wasn't the case with every seminarian that I had ever encountered. Some of them, they really struggled with the whole morning prayer thing. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, gosh, it's like, once a week he just sleeps in. Is that really so bad? And it's like, well, he's not really submitting himself to the calendar of the seminary. When the bishop asks him to take an assignment that he's not terribly excited about, is he going to be able to do that? Because that's one of the things about being a priest, is that you make promises of respect and obedience to your bishop and his successors. So that's kind of the really interesting part, because I really like my current bishop now, but I have no idea who the next bishop's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like submitting yourself to the whole burrito there.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about a mimetic element in the education, right? Like that they were performing, and that you would embody that in some sense. Like, do you think submission also has something to do with that? Like, does that help with the empathy required to see what they're doing, for example?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking about it. What I saw, I went to good seminaries. From my own perspective, they were good seminaries, and my bishop sent me there, so he obviously agreed. And I think they were able to embody the best aspects of the priesthood, at least consistently enough to where I wanted to be a part of that, right? So I would see the way they would live their lives, see the way they would preach, see the way they would interact with us, right? Because, it's like, this was an experience for me in seminary. I went to seminary at seminary at the age of 18, right after high school. And I went to a seminary that was mostly older than right out of high school. I went to a seminary that had a fair number of guys who already had some college or college degrees. So I was like very much the youngest or one of the youngest guys there. And all of a sudden, it's like I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't being treated like I was in high school. I'd be like sitting at the lunch table, and there's Paul on my right, and Paul's my dad's age, and he was like coming to seminary as a second vocation, and there was Father Battersby, and like we were having a conversation about this, that, or the other thing, and I was expected to like show up like an adult. And so I just started doing it, and I had thankfully enough humility in there where wasn't usually like fighting against the consensus of these older and wiser men. I was like, okay, I'm learning, I'm listening. And it was just kind of that, they do all of these like programs and these evaluations and those sorts of things in a Catholic seminary, and you need those sorts of things. You need to have some kind of standard you can point to. But as far as I'm concerned, most of my actual formation would have really come in interactions with the priests and interactions with the other men in the house, and they proposed the ideal of living in Christ, charitable living together, that sort of thing, and then expected us to go underneath that and treat each other according to that, no matter how you happen to be feeling about this, that, or the other thing, So it's Saturday afternoon, and you don't want to do your chores in cleaning the bathroom, right? Because we had communal bathrooms and all that. And everybody had their bit for that week, and you just had to do it because otherwise the toilets didn't get cleaned. So, yeah.
So you mentioned this aspiration that you got inspired with. Do you have a sense of how you lived up to that? Like is there like a way that you try to embody your aspiration?
Yeah, so I could think of one year, my job was to be the guy. This was at least part of the job, the person who set the schedule for cleaning the bathrooms on my hallway. Righty, that's an unenviable job right there. But I happen to be a clean bathroom enjoyer, especially when it's a communal bathroom. And these are the sort of things that will not get cleaned unless they are paid time and attention. And the results can be bad. So basically, what I did was I would be very intent on following up with people, try to be as gentle about that as possible. Well, like by X time every week, this needs to be done. And something I would do is I would personally take on the responsibility of the midweek touch-up. So in addition to, the showers or the toilets or the sinks or the floor, whatever it was I was doing that week, I would go around and just wipe things down and take care of any spot cleaning that needed to be done in the midweek. So that wasn't strictly speaking a part of my job description, but I was like, that's going to be the way that I'm putting extra effort into this and not asking for more than I should be expected.
Okay. So what's the next episode where submission is relevant?
Well, you actually jumped over an episode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's okay. We can go back to me in high school there. We can back it up a little bit. So I'm a junior in high school. School year ends, and my mom convinces me to go on a discernment retreat, right? A retreat, 5-day retreat for young men considering the priesthood. Like, okay, I'll go on that. I didn't initially want to go on that because I'd be missing the first week of the strength and conditioning program at my high school. And I was worried more about the conditioning. And I didn't really have to worry about that because we played ultimate frisbee or football every day on this discernment retreat. So I got plenty of conditioning that way. So there was a submission to my mother there. And so after this retreat, I knew I really had to take this seriously because I was like, kind of thinking this might be the way things are going. It started on thinking, and it eventually moved beyond just thinking about it, but that's where I was as a junior going into being a senior in high school. And what I remember happening over and over again was me begging God, just tell me, just show me the answer, just reveal your will to me, and that'll be enough. Right? That'll be enough, but there was kind of in the background here, the thing that I wasn't saying is, and do it right now. Don't wait. I'm busy. I've got to get on with this, And what the Lord refused to do was to just tell me right then. And what I rather suspect is that the Lord, in his kindness and his mercy towards me, knows that if he had actually told me that like that, I probably would have just said, no, I'm not doing that. Because I wasn't ready to actually receive my vocation. And so the Lord knew that, I had been given enough to ask the questions and been given enough to go. First key thing he did for me was tell me through the mouths of other priests and my vocation director that you don't go to seminary initially to become a priest. You go to seminary to discern that vocation as to whether or not you're supposed to be a priest. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm not locked in from day one. That's good. That's a good thing to know. So that got me out of my mom's basement and into the seminary. While I was in my first year at seminary, I happened across a biography of St. John Vianney, big, thick book there. And I would read St. John Vianney. He's a 19th century French priest, lived a very ascetical, disciplined life, and he got sent out to a small town in the middle of nowhere because people didn't think he was ever going to amount to all that much. And he just went absolutely as serious and as tense as he could manage in this tiny little town. in France for like 20 years. And he basically eliminated poverty in that town because he closed all the taverns down, and the taverns were where the guys would drink all their money away. And so like once he had nobody drinking all their money away, there was like no more poverty in that town. And people began to talk about him because he would have these insights into their lives during a 5-minute confession, where he would basically, and the gift is called the gift of reading souls during confession. And so he would be reading souls. Well, word gets around that you've got this priest that could read souls, and all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of people were coming every year to this tiny little French village in the middle of nowhere to get 5 minutes with the holy cure to Ars. And so for a considerable portion of his life, he was spending 12 to 16 hours a day in the confessional. And after about an hour, I'm kind of like, this can wrap up anytime. And after 2 hours, I'm like, I'm done. Let's wrap this up. He'd do 12 to 16 hours a day. And I noticed about myself that I had to be careful when I would crack open St. John Vianney's biography, because if I did it before going to bed, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night because I was just so fired up that I was going to be just like St. John Vianney, which hasn't turned out to be the case. But what that told me was that actually, Eric, I have formed you to be a priest. That is who you're supposed to be. And you actually desire this. I was like, whoa. Once I actually noticed that, right? It's like, oh, this isn't just something that's being smacked down on me, but this is something that like I'm growing into it. This is actually what I want. Mm-hmm. So that at my 4th year of seminary, when I was sitting in the chapel and I was praying with Isaiah chapter 35, where God speaks about the desert place becoming watered and the plants and trees blooming out there. And I had this image of renewal in the church, the fact that, maybe the Catholic Church looks positively dead in some places, but our Lord is the Lord of life and can cause life wherever he wants. And so I was just, yes, Lord, you're doing this even in my lifetime. And he just said to me, and you're going to be a part of that as my priest. And by that point, it was like, alrighty, let's do it. I still had another 4 years of seminary left after that, but at that point, there really wasn't ever much question in my vocation. So getting back to the topic of submission, I had to submit to God's timing because he did answer my prayer. He did tell me that I was supposed to be a priest, but he didn't do it under the conditions that me as a senior in high school expected of him. And looking back on that, I did eventually submit to God's timing. I did eventually submit to his will. And that was way better than anything I could have come up with.
Okay, so you get this vision of your life, and in some sense you're now seeing through the submission you see an extension of yourself, and there you find yourself again in a way, right? And then like it requires you to transform into what is required of you. So yeah, that is quite beautiful. So now you're living that out. Yeah, like maybe like are there more examples of submission, or because in some sense you're less on the lower part of the hierarchy, and you're more
Yeah,
at a point where you're directing.
Yep. But so when you're a new priest, you're not given your own parish to be in charge of. So right now I'm what is called a parochial vicar, which basically means that I'm working at a parish, but under the direction of a more seasoned pastor. And so I've been a priest for 2.5 years now. And that entire time I've been working at parishes, running somebody else's program. Now, it's not like the program that there's running isn't Catholicism, and I can't find my faith in it because both of my bosses so far have been good, faithful men, and I haven't had any sort of like serious conflict with them. But you know, I'm kind of an opinionated dude, and I kind of have lots of my own opinions, and maybe there would be things I would want to be doing differently, right? Um, and I just find it's a little bit easier to say, uh, you know, someday maybe you'll be able to try that. But right now it's Father Phil's program. Right now it's Father Dale's program. And you're going to run their program the way they expect you to. And that's how it is. And it didn't take me 4 years to come to peace with that. It's like, no, that's kind of where I'm at this point. I'm letting the priorities of my pastor be more my own priorities, rather than insisting on introducing incense onto every Sunday mass.
So is there an element that you recognize submission in the people that you hold responsibility for? Like is there a relationship that you're having with their submission, or you're trying to cultivate that in a way? Like how does that work?
I guess I more have an experience of my own responsibility that comes with the authority. So marriage preparation, I'll just give that as an example because it's something I do regularly. The church has a fair amount of laws and expectations with marriage, because we consider it an important thing. We have it kind of regulated. We're not just letting people go. And sometimes it's a little bit complicated. In fact, it's complicated enough where most of the time I've got to explain, well, really, this is actually pretty important, and you gotta do it this way. Um, and not that I've particularly had a temptation to do this, but it's complicated enough, and most people are unaware enough of all of the details and intricacies and all of these sorts of things where, if I wasn't being supervised, I could probably just make stuff up and people would go with it. I don't really have any desire to do that, but I do have the sense it's like, okay, these, you know, I think that for this guy, doing this process would be the best way of doing things. And I don't know how to explain, like, I've had to figure out how to explain why having your marriage done in the church is important. And, some people have an instinctive sense of that. Other people, if they're farther away from the church, they don't understand why that sort of thing is important. And why am I insisting on this before this, that, or the other thing? I don't know if that really helps, but I do kind of feel the weight of my authority, and most people are kind of like, you know, uh, okay, how do we make this happen? So like they're trusting me. They're trusting me that I'm not jerking them around as far as this goes.
Yeah. So what you were contrasting there, there's an element of rebellion, like not so much necessarily rebellion towards you, but rebellion to something different than themselves, effectively, right?
Mhm.
And that interferes with submission, right? Like, because I guess we want to contrast, like, okay, if you're not submitted, you're rebelling, right? Like, because there's this higher thing outside of you, and you're not willing to conform to it. And I think that example of not wanting to be marrying in church is one of those, because, like, why are you sitting in the office or wherever you're talking when you
Mhm.
don't want to do that? Like that.
Mhm.
a
Or
little.
they don't understand why it's important, why I've got to do all this paperwork, why all these, this, that, the other thing. And it's just sort of like, yeah, I've got to figure this out. Because usually
But
by
they
the
want to
time they're
know,
actually
right?
in my, yeah, but usually by the time they're actually in my office, they're actually kind of playing ball, right? That they're ready to cooperate, but I've gotta carry that, you know.
Well, yeah. Usually, I go towards the future. So we can touch on that a little bit. So how do you think your relationship to submission will evolve? Like, is there an aspect where you're like, oh yeah, like I'm really wrestling with this still?
Yeah, well, I'm in a hierarchical church, and I'm in a hierarchical church that actually has maybe more diversity than it looks like on the outside. And sometimes, I'm not talking about, say, ethnic or racial diversity. That's usually not a problem. I'm talking about diversity of opinions about the best way forward. Um, and sometimes I look at people who are above me in the hierarchy and their opinions, and I think it's ludicrous what they're promoting. And so how do I navigate that? Uh, it's not local as much. Like I said, my own pastors have been great to work with. Honorable men treated me very well, so it was easy in those circumstances to run their program. And my bishop is he's doing good work, and I've got a great relationship with him. But sometimes you see things happening, and it's just kind of like, oh, what is going on, you know? And I have to remind myself of where I'm at. And I'm at Holy Cross Church, and I'm the parochial vicar here. And my role is to assist the pastor in the work of, you know, saving souls and glorifying God here. And so continually reminding myself that I should be, yeah, every time I've submitted myself to God's timing, that's been great and that's been the right thing. And if he wants to call me out into some of these bigger debates in the church, he will bring me there in his own time, in his own way. But for now, I'm always happier when I'm focused on what's happening here and the work that I've been given here, rather than when I start speculating about Bishop so and so and Cardinal so and what they did and what they said and how I'm going to fix that.
So I get the sense that this submission, right? Like it's connected to an aspect of humility, right? And the way that I understand humility is knowing your place, right? Like so that you're not too high, but also not too low, right? And so has your faith or like afforded you connections or understandings to these different ways of being humble? This different, like, what are these ways in which you have to know your place?
So where I guess I see the most of this is I do spend a decent amount of time in prayer every day, and trying to practice mental prayer. And I just note my distractions. I note what my distractions are, that they tend to be me in a position of influence and attention, and I am telling people just how it is, and then everybody claps. And and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. None of that happened. And I'm sitting in my pajamas in our house chapel. And I should actually be praying right now rather than patting myself on the back for having such keen insight that I've literally received from other people. So I guess that's the way I see it. Yeah, that's where the faith part comes in, because I get that little reminder, that little whisper from the Holy Spirit that, hey, you're actually supposed to be meditating on Scripture right now, and you haven't done that for like 5 minutes. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I'm really not all that spectacular. I'm still an easily distracted sinner, and I need to be attentive to just the little patch of God's garden that I've been given, and if I'm going to be given more responsibility, that'll come on somebody else's timing, not my own.
Mhm.
Because probably every time I've gone up in responsibility, it's like, oh, this is actually more complicated than I thought.
Yeah, and so you are there that like, okay, like that path is just, it's gonna lay it out for me, and I'm just walking with my eyes open.
And I guess what really faith affords is a strong sense of providence, a strong sense that, I have my own contribution to what God's doing, but it's not all on me, that he's got the big picture, that he's laying that all out. And so I could submit myself to the Lord, and that it's just going to work out. And so if my entire life is just being a parish priest in North Dakota, and like I'm not like some big YouTube celebrity, or I'm not a bishop or a cardinal or the Pope, and that's what God wants, then that's almost certainly better than me trying to claw my way into power. Ambition just you got to be ambitious for the right things, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Ambitious in relationship to yourself, so that you can be the person that can make the next step. Yeah, do you still want to add something? Do you feel like you?
Well, those were kind of the incidents in my life that I wanted to talk about. And yeah, so I think I've said my piece. Happy to answer any more questions that you might have.
Did you gain an insight as a consequence of having this conversation? Like, did you change your mind?
Yeah. Your interrogations and your willingness to allow me to talk has actually got me a little bit of insight. Just talking these things out, it's helpful.
You're not going to share it. This is a private one, the insight.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to ask all the viewers to share their insights in the comment section, so that Father Eric can have more private insights.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
And he also has a YouTube channel that you can follow his quest to glory.
Quest to glory, that's right. Yeah, I've got the main highlight is Sunday nights. I live stream on StreamYard, and sometimes we've got some really interesting conversations. So you're invited into it. You're invited to participate.
Yeah, and it is always good to do these explorations communally. So I definitely advise you guys to hop in, especially if you have questions about the Catholic busyness. So thank you, Father Eric. It was really nice to have you here. I think it's also a great subject, because I think it's sorely needed that people reflect on these aspects that are not often highlighted in people's lives. And I want to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see you guys next time on Unfolding the Soul.